foot traffic, what people need. I've been so disappointed with the public process, you know, that we have this document. I think I've trusted this document. I participated in it. I thought this study, they talk about the enormous public participation of 20 public meetings, 30 newspapers, magazines, 150 residents. And this was a huge effort to come up with these conclusions. And when I heard about the Smith expansion, I'm thinking, what is going on here? I mean, Smith should know about this document. The mayor has never addressed this document. She says 72 was the last comprehensive plan. Everyone seems to want to put this under the rug. And I'm so disappointed that we went through this process of the planning board and the zoning board. Everyone seems to feel like, well, the mayor decided that this is what she wants to do. And there doesn't seem to be any accountability. And I'm frustrated at the idea that we can't seem to get the case out, or that nobody's even paying attention to this 95 document, that no one's refuted that this neighborhood is. And I'm just appealing to everyone to really look at the sustainability of Northampton too, because we see by pushing those types of people out of these neighborhoods, they have things to contribute, but they'll go to East Hampton, they'll go to Holyoke, they'll go to Springfield. Now, Northampton is a wonderful experiment, and it worked out very well, and all of these other cities now are saying, well, I mean, even Springfield now has a riverfront thing, and they're talking about Northampton as an example. Well, East Hampton has played on Northampton's success. You know, Northampton is great, but it's not going to grow, and it's not going to be sustainable as other communities bring in the same type of thing and have the opportunity for people who are being forced out of town to create sort of new Northamptons there. This is not something that Northampton, you know, has forever. But I really hope that everyone in the city will look at these issues and participate in having an opportunity to grow this neighborhood rather than lose it.
Okay, excellent point. I will say that we have been given copies of the reports that have been done for that, and yes, it's part of the overall mix, absolutely. I can't speak to any of the politics, okay, because I don't know, but I can say as part of the process, that whole neighborhood is being taken into account. I had two people here, a woman with her hand up there, and I had somebody up here, right? There, okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Susan Lance, and I've lived here about 7 years, and the main reason I came is for the energy of the place, not the alternative energy, but the vibrancy and the energy. And I think I attribute that to what many people have been talking about, the arts people and the diversity and the different various neighborhoods that are around Northampton. I would hate to see us become a more homogeneic community because of this, again, affordability, as Mike said, that's really hitting the nail on the head. I'd like to stress under the transportation, buses, I keep hearing walking and biking, but I think, I can't understand why we don't have more public transportation with regular routes that are pushed, that are kept in front of us all the time to do this and to participate. It is the easiest way, and I don't just mean around, well, particularly around Northampton would be great, but also to all the other communities around. The 5 colleges have there, but I don't think the residents are encouraged that much to do that. And, you know, that covers affordability, it covers energy, it covers sustainability, it covers so many things to have good public transportation. I'd also like to encourage us to think in sustainability beyond Northampton. I think we have to think in terms of bioregionalism. We have to think of working with other communities and what that means, and we have to think of working in cooperation of what one can supply that the other can't, and vice versa. And we have to also do that particularly in the way of our food sources. I think this is a big issue, and I think New England does have to work together for the food sources so that we are not using that much energy to get our food here. That brings us down to the land issues, the farming, keeping that viable so we can have a good source of local food. I think New England's going to be responsible for feeding itself in the future, particularly in 7 generations. And we should be addressing that now. We should be thinking about that.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Alex Ruesky-Schroeder. I'm really appreciative that you're here and that, in fact, this whole room is filled. I wanted to make 3 points. In addition to the definitions of sustainability that you presented, I wanted to offer up one of waste is food, which is an industrial design definition that looks at how the natural processes, the waste that's generated from one process feeds actually additional processes, and it's a really useful template to use in thinking about how we might live in community and with one another and also on this planet. I'd also like to express a real interest as a community member in the intersection of economic development, energy, transportation, and affordability. As I understand natural design, all those sort of multi-layered pieces working in concert. How is it we can create jobs by creating local energy sources? How is it local transportation can create local jobs? I really invite this community to look in those directions. I'd also like to invite all of us to understand what our community's ecological footprint is. Where do we get our food from? How much does it cost to transport our lettuce? Where is it coming from? Where do we get our fuel from? What are the different kinds of sources of fuel, and how are they generated, and what is the ecological cost? And one of the ways to think about it is, if our community takes so many acres, but our ecological footprint is so many more, how is it we can close that gap? And it's a really useful tool to think about what's the impact my individual household has, or my own individual behavior, but also on a community basis. And then finally, I think this is an opportunity for Northampton to really step forward and continue to model sustainable development, what some call smart growth, or ways to live within the constraints that are acting upon our community in terms of housing, in terms of transport, in terms of energy, in terms of food and fuel. So thank you.
Very good. I think, in back, I think you got all those points. This is great. I've got 7 people taking notes, so this is good. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Anne Fine. I live in Florence. I have kids in middle school and at the high school. And part of my question is, because I'm kind of a practical person, is I agree with a lot of what's being said, but I sort of feel like, at least I'd like to raise issues around, well, who's going to pay for this? If we're living in a country that says no one wants to pay taxes, and the city is struggling for ways to kind of, if the city's going to have any autonomy for making some of these decisions, like someone said, well, why can't we have more buses? We don't have more buses because there's no money to pay for public transportation. You know, like the kids, you know, families have to pay for their kids to ride the buses to school, so, you know, there's a problem that way too many high school kids are driving to school, and my son was in an accident on the way to school, and the rare time that, you know, we just said, you know, yeah, you don't have to ride your bike because you have a soccer game, you can get a ride, then he has an accident, and it's like, yeah, but everyone's driving, and why do we do that? Why is it not cool for our teenagers to take the bus, or there's more transport? So, but I think it comes down to, like, we can talk about all that we'd like to do, but we can't do anything if there's no money for it. And this community, I think, is also very split in terms of its vision of, do we pay a little bit more money in terms of different kinds of taxes? And unfortunately, it's only on property taxes, because that's the only way that the city is allowed to raise money. So then the community gets split between those people who, you know, can say, okay, I can, maybe because they can afford to, say I can afford to pay a little bit more, so the city will have more money to have more control over some of these things, versus, you know, the Reagan legacy of, you know, any kind of tax is bad, but we can't do anything as a whole without sort of coming up with some public money. So that's what's hard, I think, for the city to have any power against, whether it, you know, against private developers, because I think that's why there is more development farther out and people are buying, because this, you know, that's who has, so that's my thing. It's like, I think it's great to share these ideas, but then practically, you know, just putting some suggestions in, like, okay, how do we then encourage more people to say, okay, maybe taxes aren't so bad, when then we can continue to have a community that we want to live in.
Good points. I will say that as part of the discussion, well, this will be ongoing through the year, to figure out the where to put the resources, whether it's money or people or whatever. But some of the things that have been discussed already today have been, what are the alternatives to purely a publicly funded thing? Are there public-private partnerships? Are there ways to encourage private development for things that are for the common good, whether it's a transit system or something else? So that's very useful comment. Okay, I've got this one here in the green, and who else? Raise your hand so I can see. Okay, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and if you all keep it to 2 or 3 minutes, then we'll have time for a few more before 9 o'clock. Okay, go ahead.
My name is Mona Sprager, and I moved here, but that was 52 years ago as a young man. And I came from a big city, and this was heaven. It was just wonderful, a marvelous place to raise children, totally safe. I knew everybody on Main Street, and it was great. And of course, things change, and I have to accept the fact that it's not the way it was. And I understand that. But I think my concern now is seeing the growth and the so-called urban sprawl, and being concerned about the city services being able to deal with this. Our police and fire departments are on the east side of town, and a lot of the growth is on the west side of town. And I wonder about the fact that we might have to build substations and buy more fire engines and more cruisers and hire more service people. I worry about the Department of Public Works being able to deal with care of the streets and the plowing and all of that, and that's going to be more expensive. And there's the feeling that the taxes will take care of this, but I'm also looking at the stress on the schools, and we've already had to expand several schools, and I'm looking at more of that. And I think that just concerns me that it's great that people love it, and we do love this city, and it's wonderful that people want to live here, but I do think we have to look at every bit of development as something that has to be offset in some way and taken care of in some way.
Very good. Who was number 2? Is that you? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jay Adams, and I've been here about 10 years. I will share with folks that I was born here in the 50s, and as a teenager, I couldn't wait to get out of this screwed up town. And as a mother, I couldn't wait to get back here. And well, coming back here, one of the reasons we came back here is we were living in the Boston area, and we were starting a family, and I couldn't think of a better place to raise kids than Northampton, given the school system, given the diversity of the people who live here when I was growing up. And it was interesting, we didn't make it back on our first effort to Northampton. We only got halfway back to the state because we're living in a small town outside of Worcester. And it became very apparent to me and my husband that one of the things we really valued about this valley was the diversity of people, the diversity of opinions, and what an interesting and beautiful place it was to live. So we were very excited when we did get back here. But it was really very much a fluke that we were able to afford a house here. We were lucky enough to do that. But what I've seen as we've been back here the last 10 years is that people who are able to move back into the city are people who are much more affluent than we are. That when I grew up in this community, it was very much a working class community. There was a lot of value in that. There was diversity in the incomes, but there was also this real working class sector here in the valley that really helped flavor it. And when the artists came in, I remember sort of my family's reactions to that was like, oh, what's going on in downtown Northampton? Well, we've managed to sustain a pretty interesting and vibrant little downtown for, what, 20, 30 years now? And I think we've done it because we've had some good, interesting, and active discussion about what we want this community to be like. And the fact that 10 years ago, I remember participating in a forum very similar to this, where we were talking about what we wanted the community to be like. We keep this as a living dialogue, an active participatory process, and I think that's what helps keep Northampton vibrant. But I do worry about the affordability piece and who's able to live here in Northampton, and what it means, will my children be able to live here? Will they be able to live anywhere in this valley? As we see incomes, housing prices go up not just in Northampton, but throughout the valley. And that also speaks to, I think, our responsibility in terms of being a communities that sort of seen as cutting edge is how we act as a reasonable and responsible player in a broader economy, in the Pioneer Valley economy. That Northampton is not an island into itself, that we are neighbors to East Hampton, Holyoke, Amherst, Hadley to the north, and that we have some responsibility to being an important player in the region and leading the
who's here?
Edward Etheridge of Northampton. I'd like to reiterate what my good friend Kimball House says, which is that you are a member of the community not by where you live, but by what you give. And so I encourage everyone to participate not only here, but in the other institutions in this city. 12 generations ago, a couple sides of my family left Barnstable for the better soils of Ohio and ultimately Iowa. And 35 years ago, I drifted back here. What I'm concerned about is the impact of zoning, I'm a land use lawyer, on some of the issues that relate to regionalism. All of the small towns around here have zoning that prohibits multifamily housing. Northampton and Amherst, Northampton has effectively barred big box retailers. Amherst has barred much commercial development. 50% of the FTEs at the university live on this side of the river. 50% of the non-residential students of the university live on this side of the river. The big box retailers are on that side of the river. The issue of mass transit is that we can take it to go places, but we can't take it to go a total array of different places. And what I'd like to see is more integrated neighborhoods, if we're looking at Northampton, with the impact this regionalization has had on all of us. To have businesses here so that we don't have to drive to Springfield or drive to Amherst for our employment, so that we could work here where we live. It's the converse of saying, can we live where we work? We also need to work where we live. And I would like you to address those issues that this sometimes inadvertent regionalism and the parochialism of other communities foists upon us.
Good points. It's been said that Hadley has chosen, for example, to do the big box retail. The trade-off is that they're doing it along the main strip there to keep the agricultural that's behind it. I mean, that sounds like a conscious decision. Northampton has the opportunity to make the same sorts of conscious decisions about what to encourage and what to discourage, but how does it relate to that, to a neighboring town that's done something different or elsewhere? So those are very good points. It's also interesting, we've been told somewhere around 60% of the people who live in Northampton also work in Northampton. That's about 2000 census data, I'm told. If that's still true, that's very impressive. And the issue is that sustainable? Because as you're saying, is that going to be dwindling for any number of reasons we've talked about? Over here.
Hi, I'm Paul Voss. I'm a member of the planning board by way of full disclosure. But I'm speaking not as in any official capacity, it's just as an interest as a citizen here. And something I've been interested long in seeing happen, but that we haven't been able to do. And that first, to say that I think we're very lucky to live here when we see the images on the television screens from all around the world, and you see this terrible thing. We're very lucky to have a community that's safe and that people care and people are involved, and I think we're very fortunate. What I've really worried about is energy. I think that we're in a situation where energy costs are going up, where we have very little energy produced in this country and less. It's a huge part of our trade deficit. We've built a lifestyle that's incredibly energy intensive. We burn 25% of the world's oil, and we're only 4% of the population. And so we could worry about the environmental damage, but the other flip side of that is to worry about our jobs. That we're going to wonder who's going to pay us to burn this much energy when you can do it in China for much less. And I think that's part of the equation of a piece of it, while all our jobs are running overseas so quickly, and certainly devastated a town like this. I mean, we had a lot of vibrant industry, and now we're selling services to each other, and that's not sustainable. That's not going to provide high incomes for very long, I don't think. And if we look at where energy goes, I think one of the big places it goes is transportation, and it's a third of the pie typically. People say it's a third industry, and a third housing, heating, and stuff. But it's really much bigger than that, because a lot of our industry is transportation, a lot of our municipal is building roads for transportation, and if you really look at what the low-hanging fruit and what the big piece of pie is, if we're going to get our energy consumption down, it's thinking about how we get around and how we build communities that don't require a gallon of gas to buy a gallon of pump. And I think one of the real great opportunities we have is the Hospital Hill, and that going out west of there, there's some really seeds of good pedestrian oriented development. I think we really need to look at how do we steer development in close to town so it's much more pedestrian oriented than anything we've seen in New England, that we really start to be a leader in this and to create environments where the first thing people see when they walk out their front door is a safe area to walk, a path into a nearby store where they can get a paper and a cup of coffee, and they don't have to automatically get in their cars. And that would solve a lot of other problems around town in terms of all the parking issues. If we can start bringing in a lot more people and getting housing costs down by building more and building them closer so we don't create quite as much traffic when we build the housing, I think we really have to look very seriously at this great opportunity that the state has given us with the land that's up there and with the land beyond. That there's some very good development going in. So that would be mine.
David, super. Okay, 3 people here. 1, 2, 3. Is that right? And then I've got 2 people, 3 people, and then 4 people. Okay, by then it'll be 9 o'clock, and we'll see if we want to keep going. Go ahead.
I'm Ed Hagelstein. I've lived here all my life. It's been forever. I'm not going to tell you how long. I want to go back to the first topic that was covered here. We talked about schools and how many children walk to school. I walk to school, and the reason we don't do that anymore is because back years ago, somehow the philosophy was to do away with the old neighborhood schools, like we're too old, too this, too that. But every single one of them is still standing and used right now. And we went and built all new schools in certain areas. So, and back then, since they were in the neighborhood, the teachers knew the parents knew the teacher, the teacher knew something about the child, what kind of environment he was coming from, and all the rest of it. It was a far better system. And so anyway, in the long-term plan, and I guess we're talking about in the next couple hundred years, if we're talking about 7 generations, we're talking about 500 years, maybe we could change it and make it right. Smith College. Again, we've got to start thinking 100 years, 500 years, whatever it happens to be. Now, I know Smith is going to take part of Green Street, and they're going to put up that big science center. I'm in favor of science. But with the, in that time, they are going to have to expand again. Now, they're going to, in the next 20 years, they're going to obliterate that entire neighborhood. It's not just going to be a few houses, all those houses from Green Street all the way down to West Street. That entire section of residential housing is going to be gone. Now, right across the river, right where the athletic field is, we've got Hospital Hill. Now, this project has been sold to the city or whatever, but it's not going very well. The state is pumping in money. They just gave us $2 million to try to keep that project going for housing. And more housing, but there's no business. And if you all don't know this, for every dollar you get in real estate tax from a house, it costs $1.15 in city services to take care of that house, to support that house and the street and all the rest of it. So every residence that is built, it's a burden, an additional burden to the city, regardless of what you pay for taxes. So I think somewhere in the planning stage, somebody should have looked at the Hospital Hill area for Smith College. Then at least they have enough room up there to expand for 1,000 years. And certainly it would be far better than whatever it's going to be, 200 and something houses that are going to be put up there as it is. Now I want to go to something else. I was on.
Time, are you almost done?
Yes. I want to read something from your document you handed out at the first meeting. A sustainable community is one which recognizes that growth occurs within some limits and is ultimately limited by the carrying capacity of the environment. I drew an analogy today in Joe Donald's session with the beaches at Cape Cod. If any of you have been down to Cape Cod for a summer vacation, if you want to go to one of the beaches, if you get there too late in the morning, you're going to come up and drive up, and there's going to be a sign in the road that says parking lot full. So what you have to do is go down and find down to another beach and keep going until you find one open. And if they didn't do that, they certainly have room for larger parking lots, and they could just pave over all that Bermuda grass that's around there, and they could, but when you went in there, the problem is you would not be able to bring a beach blanket with you. They would say the largest thing you could take was a face cloth. And you go down there and stand on one foot, because all the people next to you would be standing on 1 foot out of face water. So it would sort of ruin the whole beach experience. And I wanted to kind of draw that, compare that to Northampton. And I don't want any of the new people to feel unwelcome here at all, because we're not to that stage yet. But it's something that it's something that we have to think about, that we have to consider. And one of the things in concerning the carrying capacity of the environment, about 2 or 3 years ago, we had that big drought here, and the Ryan Reservoir was down to 25% of its capacity. And you know well, the way reservoirs are, they're wide at the top and they come down at the bottom. So when you get near the bottom, it goes away much faster. Now, how many people, if we had a lot more people in town, would we have run out of water? A few years ago, there were droughts in Massachusetts where some towns in Massachusetts actually did lose all of their surface water. So we do have some limitations about as far as how far we can go, and it really depends on, our resources.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Good points. Okay.